you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join Doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
In this episode, we are once again interviewing with Dean Jacobs. He was the guest on episode number 101. If you haven't yet listened to that, I highly recommend it. And Dean is an author, a speaker, a coach, a photographer, an overall inspiring human being that I've been blessed to know for the last several years. And he has agreed to share with us information about how can we consistently show up in adversity without grinding into burnout. And I can't wait to hear more about this from you today, Dean. And I would love for you to share one of the stories you shared with me before, with our listener, about the buffalo and how they show up when the storms are coming.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm happy to be back with your audience, and it's a joy to be hanging out. And a big shout out to those servants-hearted physicians who are so committed and dedicated. So if you don't always hear it from your patients, thank you for who you are and the difference you make. Now, the buffalo. I live in Nebraska. I'm in the Midwest. Even though I've been through 58 countries around the world, I came back home to make a difference from where I come from. And particularly in the last decade or so, I've been working with Native American communities here in Nebraska. And they have a sacred relationship to the American bison, or what we call the buffalo, because the buffalo provided so much food source and materials into their living and for their survival and ways of life, actually. And this last winter, I got contacted by a marketing agency to take some photos of from this buffalo breeder down by Lincoln, Nebraska. And it was in February. It was like -10, -15. It was really cold there. It was really cold outside. Yeah, it's part of being in Nebraska in the winter, right? And I'm taking photos of these bison, and the breeder said, they'll run. Just so you know, when they come he turned them loose from wherever they were, and they came running into the storm. And I'd heard this metaphor before, but I actually got to experience it and feel it firsthand. The American bison, the buffalo, when the storms come, they actually run into the storm. They actually run right into it. So, that would beg the question, why would the buffalo run into the storm? Because they have learned that if they run away from the storm, all that does is elongate the stress and all that comes with that process. And instead, they run right into the storm, because when you run into the storm, it gets over quicker, right? And on the other side of that, you get to see the rainbows a little bit faster. You also develop confidence and strength every time you run through the storm, that you start to create an emotional identity. I'm someone who does hard stuff. It's one of my mottos, one of my rallying calls, I guess I would call it, be the buffalo. Like be the buffalo. We are people who, we don't run from the hard things. We run into the storm. Now, we can't always control the wind and the waves. So one of my designs that I got going on with me is I have a buffalo on a surfboard. We're going to ride that wave of energy of life, but we're also going to be intentional. We're going to ride right into the storm, believe in ourselves and our capacity to make a difference, and that we have the strength not only to move through that storm, but every time we go through it, storm after storm, we get stronger and stronger, become more clear. As every time we do it, we develop the skills how to move into that storm more intentionally, with intention. And that's the whole point of all that metaphor. Be the buffalo. Be intentional. But we don't avoid things. We're the people who run into the storm. I love it because I can feel the energy. I don't know if you can feel on that side of the microphone, but I can feel the energy of that. Yeah. So I'll be driving down the road, and I'll have hard days, just like everybody has hard days, right? If they'd probably lock me up if they'd ride around and watch me, I'd be just talking to myself, be the buffalo, be that buffalo, because it's not an accident that we're here. So what are we going to do to show up with that kind of intention and have some grace along the way? Not to do it perfectly, but ride that wave of life and move forward to make the difference that we're here to make.
And in the last episode 101, you shared about your own hard things, your brush with death from malaria. And that was so powerful. And you also choose to work with individuals who have had tough things in their lives, maybe not just for their life, but going back generations. And I would love to hear how you weave your mantra of being the buffalo, how you weave your experience in personal development and positive psychology that you shared in the last episode in order to show up not using the grind method, which to me is self-sacrifice and burnout.
And martyrism, I would say.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. In the face of hard things and role model for others when facing hard things.
Okay, great question. Well, these days, the last, you know, Aaron, that I've been working with in a Native American school here in Nebraska. Intense. It's been a lot. I guess I can't think of the right word, but a lot for the last 5 years. And, you know, high poverty, high trauma, isolated poverty on top of it. So it's not like they have their kind of mingled in with everything, and it's just like it's an isolated community. And that has its own unique dynamics because they don't even get to see around them a lot of other examples of other ways of doing things. And I was brought into that community, invited into that community to help begin to shift the environment and climate to be more hopeful and optimistic. And my approach is like, we think in pictures. So if I say apple, what do you see? You see an apple, right? And is it red or green or yellow? It's one of those colors, right? So we process a lot of our information in the way of images. And I've got thousands, maybe millions of images from my 8 or 9 years of backpacking around the world through 58 countries to help them begin to see some images of the world that are a different narrative than what they're constantly being given or what they even say to themselves. So we begin to change their narrative of how they see the world. And also in the coaching process, we begin to change the narrative of what they say to themselves, how they show up in that. So, and I got fun stories. I mean, I've done fun stuff. Lived with mountain gorillas for 8 or 7.5 months in Rwanda, floated 3,000 miles of the Amazon River in South America, been to the base camp of Everest, been from the top of Africa to the bottom by public transportation. I really put myself at the mercy of the world. Been the birthplace of Jesus, birthplace of Buddha, birthplace of Krishna. There's this amazing world. But if you're never given that narrative, then we can't, if you're given the negative narrative or the image of the world is nothing but scary, no wonder why people don't want to engage with it or give themselves the capacity or teach themselves the capacity to engage with it for themselves or to create the world they want to have, which is then a sense of agency. So I go and bring in my stories and my images from around the world and I help them see. Because seeing is this is one of my mantras, seeing is feeding your dreams. So let's be intentional about what we put on our mental dashboard about what we see, because that impacts how we feel and how we process, and how we feel and process determines the actions we take or we don't take, which then gives us different results or not results, right? So I start from the very basic standpoint, and then I just refuse to get enrolled into the victim mentality. I honor who they are and where they're at this point in time, but I just don't think it's an accident that they're here. I don't think it's an accident that I'm here. So how are we going to work? How can we do this dance together in a way that honors who they are and also honors who they can become? Not from a place of making them wrong, but from a place of feeding that internal fire inside them so they can burn a little bit brighter. They don't have to have the whole pathway. They just need sometimes enough light to see what the next step is. So if we can see the next step, then we can take some form of action, and eventually we can start to create some momentum moving forward. But if we can't, if we're trapped in darkness, if we're trapped in a box, as I like to say, then we're paralyzed in fear. Then we lose sense of hope, and then then horrible things start to happen.
And I want to share some parallels with the individuals that you've been working with for the past 5 years. You talked about victimhood. You talked about a history of trauma, not just poverty, but isolated poverty. And another term that comes to mind is learned helplessness, which I think is very common, especially right now in medicine with, the world in the state it is, the U.S. in the state it is, medicine in the state of that it is. Just, you look around and everywhere you look is like, holy cow, it's like, what in the world are we even supposed to do? And yet you talk about what's the one right step? How can I shine enough light to get to one step forward? And what am I putting on my mental dashboard? And as I coach clients, it's like, how much news are you watching? What are your feeds on your social media? What do you need less of in order to protect yourself, in order to be able to be productive, instead of just getting lost in this swirl? And I know for myself, having worked in child abuse medicine for 10 years, I got exposed to so much trauma in my daily work life. I couldn't listen to NPR. I couldn't watch the news. I still don't usually watch violent movies because my brain and my body's like, nope, you've had enough. And what do I need to protect myself? And so being careful about paying attention, it sounds like, to what are you feeding? What are you looking at? What are you listening to? And even who are you hanging out in your community? And Joanne and I frequently talk about this. Who are the 5 people you spend the most time with? And if they are putting more negative into you or stealing positive energy from you, and you want to make a difference, then what do you need to do in order to make those shifts?
Yeah, remember, awareness is the gateway to change, right? So when we become aware of the environment where we swim in, then we can start to make some choices. I call it the negative narrative. The negative narrative that robs us of our curiosity and takes the oxygen out of our humanity to be engaged with one another, and then leaves us isolated, scared, and alone kind of stuff. So we got to make sure that we're waving oxygen on our internal flame, our spirits of who we are and who we want to become and the difference we want to make, trusting in that process, knowing that it will have an impact. And I went to that school. I got invited to the school, and don't get me wrong, it is hard. It is hard work to go into the face of the tsunami of that kind of situation. But everyone deserves a dream. Everybody has the capacity to dream. And life is filled with stories of people who had really hard starts or hard chapters, but found some way to find some grace and believe in themselves. Nelson Mandela, for example, and others along the way. So I know that it's possible. So which narrative are we going to empower? And which narrative are we going to cultivate on the inside of us, that internal garden? And how are we going to cultivate that? Those are the habits and the practices and the processes and the rhythms and all those routines that we do, that cultivation process. So that way we can keep that internal garden, that internal flame in a good place. And every day we're given choices. So I don't do the news either, Aaron. I don't do the news. I for sure don't listen to that stuff because it's not even news anymore. It's about people's opinions about news that have a particular agenda that they want to, who knows what their agenda is. So no, I'm not going to let that impact my, what do you call that part of the back of your brain? Yeah, that part. That back, no, because they're masters at that. They are. Now, I'm also a dude that wants to be aware of the world. I'm not talking about Pollyannish, putting my head in the sand and say everything's roses and rainbows kind of thing. No, I want to know. So that way I can be informed and make choices. But I'm going to do it from a place of groundedness, from a place of commitment, from a place of the version of being the best version Dean Jacobs can be, or whatever, our doctors who they've chosen to be. But that's why we have to cultivate that stuff along the way. Because when you operate in the face of that ongoingly, I can tell the days that I don't do my work so diligently, right? And I'm not on my game as well. Sometimes I leave the school up there. I only go to the school once a week, but sometimes did I do any good today? did I impact anybody today? And that's usually from an exhausted standpoint. That's an indicator like on the mental emotional dashboard. No, I need one way or another, I need to find a little more rest. I need to move my body a little more consistently, even if it's just stretching or I start doing planks in the morning, Aaron. I do planks on the ground to strengthen my core kind of stuff. I can feel the difference. Even those little things helps me show up better in the face of that. And then pretty soon what happens is you're role modeling the way to the people who don't have a lot of examples of that. And they start to follow your lead. And it's not about me. I know that. But if their mental dashboard and visual dashboard has only got alternative things that are not positive, then how do we expect them to make different choices?
And what I heard you say is there are days where you don't show up at your best. You self-reflect and go, what was missing? And as I coach women in medicine, they're so busy. They're so focused on everyone else. Their own self-care can be abysmal. And I was that way for the first, 20 plus years of my medical career. And even little tiny shifts. For one client, it was going to bed 15 minutes earlier, had a huge shift on our energy. One person, it's erasing social media or the news. And so not to be overwhelming, but if we start paying attention and measure what's my energy, what's my emotional state, and no longer accept, the frazzle you that comes home at the end of each day as an acceptable norm.
Yes.
I have talked about, let's challenge those norms. Can you create something that's non-negotiable? And so whether that's around, the basics, your sleep, what you eat, how you move your body. And you may be like, yeah, Erin, I don't have 15 minutes to meditate like you do every day. And so I say to you, well, do you wash your hands between patient care? Do you wash your hands if you deal with kids all day? So you could create a mini meditation when you wash your hands where you close your eyes, maybe, or you leave them open.
Yeah.
Take a couple of deep belly breaths. And that can give you enough fuel to preserve some of your energy. So little tiny microscopic changes to your day. A 5-minute walk at lunch, getting outside. For one client has
instead of looking at social media, right, or something like that,
and making them additive. Maybe I just shared this example with the residents that I was teaching yesterday. Was one of my clients, a 5-minute break. So instead of being at her computer all day or during her entire lunch break, which is usually not a break for physicians, she would go for a 5-minute walk, one lap around her clinic. She lives in the beautiful Northwest, so she had nice nature to see. She started inviting colleagues with her. So instead of doom scrolling on her phone, which is another screen, it's like, how many positive things is she doing in that one 5-minute walk? She's off screen, so she's giving her eyes a break. She's not doom scrolling, so she's not tapping or zapping her decision fatigue more than she already has. She's socializing when others choose to go with her. She's changing her environment. She's getting outside. She's moving her body, even in a walk. All of those things have this synergistic effect where one 5-minute walk can give you a huge bang for your buck to get through the rest of your day. So I don't want our listener to minimize that one tiny little shift in your day can have big rewards, especially when you do it consistently.
Exactly. And one of the things I heard what you said, Erin, is like you get that client gamified it. How many things can I squeeze in that are positive in 5 minutes? The gamified challenge of that. I like the challenge energy of that versus, all right, you could do this. No. How many could you squeeze in there? I'm just curious and become curious about it and then trust.
And when you don't have time or energy, I also talk about, what's serving the right now you, which if you're emotionally and physically and mentally exhausted, you're not thinking of future you. So when you think about decisions, I'm exhausted, I'm going to pick up fast food on my way home, or I feel bad, I had a bad experience with my patients today, I'm going to eat a bowl of ice cream because that makes me feel better in the moment. But is that serving future you?
Yeah.
And can we, even in our exhaustion, even in our overwhelm, start making more decisions that are good, not just for the you right now, are going to make you feel better in the moment, but are going to be better for future you. So for example, instead of watching a 30-minute show on TV or a Netflix binge, which, or doom scrolling, could you instead go to bed 10 minutes earlier or 30 minutes earlier, or do a meditation?
Or read a book or something that's not screen-oriented kind of thing. So, and that's a process. Whenever I'm doing my keynotes and kind of stuff, I always say, I'm not here to fix anybody. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I'm here to invite you to have a little more peace in your heart and joy in your journey. And that's how I opened it up, because those are all choices that we make along the way. And besides, if you want me to fix you, that costs a lot more money. And then if you want me to convince you, I double it, because that's a lot more work.
Yeah. Well, and even the curiosity, I hear you in making invitations and hoping that people get curious. And that's what I'm hoping for our listener, is that we can get you curious about some of the things we bring up and just invite you to say, give it a try and see what happens. And you might be surprised at the benefit, and it might not be overnight. I was talking with somebody about or reading about supplements, and the expert said, you may notice this in the first 30 days. You might notice this in the first 60 days and this in the first 90 days. So when I shared what I had learned with one of my clients who was working on sleep habits, and they're like, oh, I only gave it a week. I didn't give it the 30, 60, 90 days to maybe have the full impact. So sometimes we need to get curious and try things a little longer before we have those.
Yeah, and be aware that it takes a while sometimes, and it's good to be told that, like, you're not going to have. We didn't get here in a weekend, or we're not going to get out of this in a weekend. The shift. Sometimes we have a mental unlock, but the insight, the unlock, doesn't give you the result. The result it took time to get to this result. It's going to take time to get to the next result of what you want to become or how you want to be. And give yourself some grace and patience, and also belief in yourself that it's possible, because there's plenty of examples. This, when we start to whisper, hey, well, that's for everybody else, not me. Well, then we got to work on that. Then it's time to do some more reflection. Well, why would you be the exception when universally human? It generally works, right? So that's a challenging statement. That's not a judgment. I hope it didn't come across that way.
Yeah. Dean, we've talked a few times during this episode and the prior interview with you where we talk about community, and you shared that the name Omaha. Share that definition with our listener again.
Well, because I'm working with the Omaha people, and the word Omaha actually has a meaning. The word Omaha means the people who move against the current, because when they came to this part of the continent in the 1700s, they traveled up the Missouri, and when you traveled up the Missouri, you have to move against the what? You have to move against the current. And do we move against the current for fun? No, you got to be determined. You got to be resilient, have a vision for what you want to get, where you want to go, who you want to be. You just don't do that for giggles, right? Kind of thing. So, but you also need to be strong. And I love that metaphor. And I think it's one of the gifts of the Omaha people, to not just for the Omaha people to themselves, but for all humanity, to remind us that we have this capacity to move against the current, to move into the storm like the buffalo thing. And on knowing that we will get to where we want to go and who we want to be. But it's also the people who move against the current. It's not the person who moves against the current, it's the people. That means community. Together we will move forward when we have clear vision for who we want to be and what we want to create, versus getting lost in all the distractions and all the negative narrative stuff and all things that we have, that we're swimming in these days. So we want to be intentional about that and have that vision together, collect and create that vision.
And we talk often on this podcast about community. And as I think about the individual woman healthcare provider trying to make a change on her own, or thinking I'm the worst at, whatever it is that you're worried about doing, and not understanding that there are others in medicine struggling with the same things you are. Many women I work with, are having struggles getting their charts done in real time, or spending nights and weekends doing work-related things, maybe not showing up as the parent that they want, or being the partner or spouse that they want, and thinking like, that you're the only one with that problem. And what I've found as a coach working with many, many women in medicine is that you are not alone. There are others struggling with similar issues. And so not only would I encourage you not to try to make these changes alone, it's to find a community. You don't have to build it, but look for communities that are out there. And that's why Joanne and I have built communities with group coaching, with our one-on-one programs, and with retreats and things, so that women in medicine can come together in community. And I just hosted a retreat a couple weeks ago, and it was magical. Each of these women had seen each other on Zoom calls. They each knew me, but we all came together in person at this beautiful retreat. And it was amazing how much more seen they felt, and also how much more inspired they were when they hear about the other women and what have they been able to do to overcome. And when we show up to group calls, then, the person who's taking in more water, the person who's exercising more, is not only helping themselves, but they're helping each person in that community do a better job in that, because they're role modeling and sharing their successes. So I don't want to minimize how powerful community is in helping you not have to carry that weight of trying to make change on your own, but doing it together, swimming up, or, traveling upstream.
Moving against the current.
Moving against the current. Yes. Thank you, Dean. Moving through the oncoming storm together as a herd, as a people.
Can I add something? I'm sorry, Aaron. The buffalo don't run alone either. They run as a group. Buffalo doesn't run as an individual. I saw it. They actually run together into the storm.
Into the storm. Yeah.
And that's how they watch out for each other and protect each other. And then, the strongest males and females are ahead, and then the younger calves and the older are right behind them as they plow forward ahead.
Yeah. So powerful. So that reminder about community and not forgetting that. And so, Dean, is there, we've shared that the name of this podcast is Create Meaning in Medicine, Rewriting the Rules for Women Physicians. Obviously, you're not a woman physician, but I would love to hear from you. How are you rewriting the rules in your life?
First of all, who makes the rules? Right? Like, I make my own rules. Now, it doesn't mean I don't follow rules. I mean, you know what I mean? But I'm always like, okay, does that rule really apply to me? Or is that a self-imposed rule? Am I limiting myself? Or is this something that serves me? Is this a rule for the community? Or is this a rule that I put into my head about myself kind of stuff? So I'm always willing to examine those rules kind of stuff to make sure they're not a self-limiting belief, right? A rule that I've been putting on myself to box myself in. I'm always telling, I work mostly with schools kind of stuff. But I always share this metaphor, even when I'm doing keynotes for, not just educators, but like town hall meetings and whatever, I did one for real estate, telephone companies. I mean, the metaphor is universal. On the other side of this wall of fear, there's a whole world waiting to be explored. And I learned that when I was 9 years old, when I rode my bike by myself 10 miles down the gravel road and back and got chased by dogs, because dogs live in the countryside here and they never caught me. But that was the fear of getting caught by a dog. And if you've ever been chased by a dog on a bike, you know what I'm talking about. And so when I realized that on the other side of that wall of fear, there's a whole world waiting to be explored. But if I let that wall of fear stop me, I get trapped in the box, right? The small box. And we're supposed to live in little boxes. No, we're supposed to stretch and blow them up, I believe. By what? By dreaming big, living tall, to do our part to make the world better. The vision of who you want to become, dreaming big. Who do you want to become? What do you want to experience? What do you want to have? What do you want to contribute? And then living tall. It's not just going to the world, but how we move into the world with honesty and dignity and respect and all those human qualities. And then what's the purpose of life? It's not just to walk through life, pay bills and die, but to do your part to make the world just a little bit what? Better along the way. So I'm always examining, am I boxing myself in, or am I challenging myself to grow? Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. Does it align me to my mission? That's what I found. Oh, my watch just talked to me. I hate when that does. Watch it. All right, cut that out of the podcast. And then, or you can leave it in. I don't care. And I kind of stuff. So, am I limiting myself, my self-limiting beliefs? Or am I challenging myself to grow, knowing that it's a learning journey, a growth mindset? I may not know how to do it yet, but with the time and energy and focus and intention, I'm going to find a way to move from point A to point B and then make my contribution and be a hot mess as I go, because I'm part of the humanness of this whole planet here on Earth, right? So how am I going to show up? So the rules. So rules can either support us to grow, or they can confine us and stymie our growth. We have to be aware of what rules we're operating in and why.
I love that. You've shared so many powerful stories, Dean, sharing about Be the Buffalo and being able to run into the storm together in order to make that storm pass more quickly and get to the rainbows more quickly, about shifting hope into optimism, paying attention to what we put on our mental dashboard. And sometimes all we need to do is see that next step. We don't need to see the whole journey in front of us. And then being aware about, are we writing a negative narrative for ourselves, or what narrative will we cultivate, like a garden, and what we tend to, what weeds are we going to pull from that garden? What are we going to nurture in order to keep our internal garden in a good space or a good place? So thank you so much, Dean, for sharing your wisdom, your mantras, your insight into how we can show up in the face of hard things with optimism, with hope, and with the ability to move one step forward. And again, if you have not listened to episode 101, part 1 of the interview with Dean Jacobs, please take a listen to that and learn about how he developed even more reverence for life and big shifts that happened with a near-death scare for him. And Dean, if individuals would like to hear more from you or learn more about what you do, where can they find you on the internet or social media?
Yeah, well, I have a website, Dean Jacobs. That's DeanJacobs.org. That's my website. And then I'm on social media, Facebook, Dean Jacobs Adventures on Facebook or Instagram. Those are the best ways to find me.
Love it. Thank you so much again for being the guest today. And with that, we would love for our listener to take a pause. And if you have not yet rated the show, head to the show, find those stars and give us a rating. And if you have the ability to leave us comments, we look at all of those. We would love to hear from you and how we can serve you even better. And with that, stay tuned to our next episode.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.